Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Starr, and welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. This is a series I've been inspired and guided to do thanks to my energetic connection to Katajuda, which is the sacred masculine site in Central Australia, very close to Uluru, which is our sacred feminine site. And as it is, actually, I'm just back from 10 days out there in the Australian desert with my beautiful soul brother, Ladi, and we were doing lots of, we'll call it energy work and, being guided by whatever we were called to do to bring in the energies of the new earth, which are well and truly expansive and heading our way. And they're accessible to anyone right now who wants to access them. So that was definitely an amazing experience. And I have lots of little video clips on my page if any of you would like to check out the beautiful energy and colours of Central Australia. Now, my guest today is an Aussie, and his name is Jason Bluett. Now, Jason is a men's work facilitator and coach, and he's also the founder of a men's movement called the Primal Man Project. And it's a men's movement dedicated to helping men live life by their evolutionary design. So Jason has spent a lot of time as a youngster in Papua New Guinea. So he was very influenced by the culture and the way that men are over there. And he's bringing that back to the grassroots level of masculinity. So really looking forward to unpacking Jason's journey, finding out tools, practices, insights, wisdom. What can he now share with other men walking the path into the heart? And of course, us women who are walking right there beside them. So thank you for being here and enjoy. Hello, Jason Bluett. Welcome to Heart Warriors.
Thank you so much, Gemma. Great to be here. Oh, amazing. Feeling really recharged after Christmas. It's 27th of December when we're recording, and I'm actually in the middle of a planning time of year. My partner and I are sitting down together, creating our intentions and our goals and planning for the year. So it's a really fruitful time. I'm feeling really recharged. Lots of family time over Christmas. So yeah, amazing.
Oh, so good. Okay, let's get right into it. And this is a question I always like to ask. Who is Jason Bluett? Now, I don't want all the external labels. I want to know who the man is inside. How would you describe that man?
It's a great question because my head goes to the things that I do. And I know that there's a deeper question here. How would I describe myself? I'm a heart-centered man, and I believe here in this experience of this round of life to help men return to a way of being that was in great service to us a long time ago and something that a lot of us have gone away from. So as a man, I embody and I share ways of being for healthy, grounded, masculine men. And how do I identify externally in the world? I'm a father, I'm a leader, and also I serve. As my way of leadership, I believe in servant leadership. I'm here to support and to facilitate transformation for men. So those are some things that come through in that question.
Wonderful, thank you. So let's have a look at your journey into the heart. We'll see how you got to be that man. Let's go back to your childhood. What would you say was the greatest challenge that shapes you into the man you are today?
Well, I was born and raised in Papua New Guinea, which was an amazing place to grow up. So lots of really beautiful influences into the work that I now do with men. And the biggest challenge I experienced when I was young was when I was 9 years old, my home was destroyed by a volcano. So we had really for a long time, all of the life that we created since the 1970s living in Rabaul in Papua New Guinea was distinguished by being before or after the eruption. So it was a really big defining event. And as a boy, I was forced into a position of responsibility, maturity, independence, and in a way received an early initiation into sort of early adulthood in a way. And a lot of my friends I never saw again. My hometown destroyed. So school, home, places that were familiar to me, and life changed, forever from that point.
Wow, and 9 is such a pivotal age there because you can really grasp what's going on, right?
Mm.
Now, why did that throw you into this position of responsibility?
My parents did a really good job, and they had to kind of scramble to keep things together. So my father was working really hard to keep his business running. My mother had, and I was the elder of 3 siblings that were living with us at the time. My 2 elder siblings were overseas and had sort of grown up. So I was needing to be a lot more independent, needing to be a lot more self-sufficient. And in a lot of ways, the emotional element of the things that maybe a young boy needs in that time, leadership from his father and continued support and care from parent figures, my parents just didn't have an opportunity to provide that, considering what they were going through. So in a way, I think I self-parented, and somewhat successfully. Some things I got and some things I didn't get. So that was a really big uptick in my maturity and development.
Wow. So how do you remember that 9-year-old little Jason stepping up and comprehending the enormity of the situation? Like, did that unsettle him, or did he step right into it out of no choice?
It's only with retrospect, looking back, that I realized that the things that I did and my ways of being were probably born in those moments. So in later years, I was always described as someone who was older than his years, had maturity about him. Even when I went to high school, I went to boarding school at age 12, again, separated from family, and always was able to hold myself, to a standard of behavior and standard of maturity. Looked after my younger brother. I'm not sure if he would say that I did much looking after, but I think on some level I did attempt. And I remember my relationship with my mother did change. She started to interact with me more as a co-contributor to the home and to supporting my younger brother than you would probably see as a normal mother-son relationship.
Right. And so did the family get back on its feet and resettle?
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad did an amazing job of rebuilding our family business, and we all moved back together into a family home in back in the hometown again, a fair distance away from the volcano. And, life went back to normal for a little while, but then it wasn't long after that I was actually sent off to boarding school. So it was almost like from that moment of 9, I never really had a very long-term stable home and family environment.
Yeah. What did you learn? What's the difference between, would you say, men in Papua New Guinea and men in Australia?
Massive difference. I really saw the contrast when I came down to Australia. I was a white kid in a black country, effectively. Papua New Guinea nationals are darker skinned, and so I was unique in that environment. And then when I came to Australia, I was culturally more like Papua New Guinea, and so I came to Australia and saw it was very, very different. So some of the things that stick out for me in Papua New Guinea, men have initiation. We have rites of passage, and they have spaces for men, secret men's business. And similarly with women's spaces, we would go on picnics, and we would go to different places in the bush, and would go to places and they'd say, don't go to that creek. That's a women's creek. I said, what do you mean it's a women's creek? How do the women own the creek? That doesn't make any sense. And they said, well, just trust us. It's better this way. Just leave that space. That's for women. That's for their women's business. And that hut down there on the beach, that's the men's hut. All the cats and all the dogs and all the boys, they're all male, and they do their men's business down there. And so, what's this men's business about? I said, well, we can't tell you. You're not initiated. We're not. It's secret. So early on, I saw these things that at the time I thought were pretty weird, And then growing up in Australia, I had to kind of unlearn all of that and come into a mainly Anglo-Saxon, all boys, Catholic, rugby playing private school for boarding school. So it was almost the complete opposite. Australian men were not in any way physically affectionate towards each other. They were openly hostile and pretty brutal and pretty volatile with each other. They were not accepting of outsiders. So, yeah, it was pretty different in a lot of ways. Papua New Guinean men are very open to physical affection with other men. They express care and affinity and brotherhood. They have a deep sense of connectedness amongst men, and they acknowledge and understand that there are things that men do together that are really special. And there's almost no homophobia. And, you know, men in Papua New Guinea will actually walk down the street holding hands, and that's part of their platonic masculine intimacy.
So interesting. Did you get initiated in Papua New Guinea?
No, I wasn't old enough when I came down to boarding school, and wasn't spending enough time in the kind of closeness that you would need to in a community before you'd be eligible for initiation. So no, I didn't have an opportunity to, but I was close enough to people who were, and were also close enough to people to understand some of the practices, but I never saw on the inside of initiation, no.
Are you able to share any of that information about the initiation and the age that they go through and what they go through?
In a general sense, observationally, young boys in the region where I'm from, so the town I'm from is called Rabaul, and the culture there is called they're the Tolai people. And in the Tolai tradition, when a boy is able to reach a certain physical challenge, and I don't know what the physical challenge is, but he's invited to be challenged physically, he's invited to be initiated. And they have a whole series of rituals and practices that they administer while he's in exclusive company with the men. So he goes away to the men's hut for up to a month, and he's isolated from his parents and from his mother and the women. And at the end of that, he's considered, and he earns his rite of passage. I do know actually a little bit more about a particular culture in the north of Papua New Guinea, in the Sepik River, where they have a river system. And their culture is very connected to the crocodile because they live on a river delta. So saltwater crocodiles are massive up there, and a big part of their traditional culture. The young boys spend 2 days in initiation having their skin sliced with razor blades down their back. And these incisions, when they scar up, create a pattern on their back that resembles a crocodile. And they have to lie on their stomach for 2 days to keep the wounds clean. And then when they're bathing, they bathe into the river and allow their blood to be smelt by the crocodile. And the belief is that the crocodile will see and smell them and know who they are and consider it one of them, and then they won't be eaten.
Wow.
So it's pretty brutal.
Does it work?
Don't know, can't say I've tested it or know anybody who has personally, but it's extraordinary. And this is just one of 150 different language groups that you could probably talk and point to that have all kinds of different initiation practices for boys.
How fascinating. And how old are the boys in both cases? The first case you spoke about and the girls?
So in the Tolai culture, it can be anywhere between 11 to 13, but it's around puberty. And in the Sepik, they have, I don't know what their measure is, to be honest, what their threshold point is, but it's a similar age, around puberty.
And do all boys have to go through it?
Yeah. In those particular cultures, yeah. There are places that don't have active connection to their initiation practices and rites of passage. For various reasons, the cultures, especially in Rabaul where the volcano erupted, some of those people were then displaced, and so they were no longer able to be in connection with their original land and their original people. So a lot of their traditional cultural practices died off, or certainly in recent years have. But in the Sepik, that place, it is compulsory for boys of that particular tribe.
So amazing, especially as it's so close to Australia, where we are. It's like, for people who don't know, it's located right above Australia, Papua New Guinea. Um, do you regret not having had the opportunity to go through that initiation, or you feel it all fell into place for your life as it is?
Look, I'm grateful for everything I had. I saw enough to understand the beautiful traditional ways of being that we can be inspired by. But I also feel there's something to be said for not culturally appropriating and culturally adopting someone else's way of being just as a cultural curiosity. So no, I'm really happy with my journey and I don't regret anything. I'm really grateful that I had everything that I did.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to say or you feel is important to say around this time that you had in Papua New Guinea before we move on, or about men in Papua New Guinea?
Yeah, I think really what it showed me was there was a way of being that we had been living inside of for hundreds of thousands of years. And in PNG, it's probably about 60, 70,000 years they were there. And the contrast that I experienced coming down to Australia really helped me understand that there was something very, very different about the way that we live in the modern world. And a big part of my work is not to take those practices from cultures that don't belong to me, but to be inspired by the things that gave men. It gave men a sense of, this is our culture. This is a thing that you can do to earn the right into adulthood. And this is something that you can now be a part of, is a sacred and special place for men. So yeah, it really did inspire the rest of my journey. And little did I know it was kind of planting the seeds that one day I would come full circle back to, doing men's work, and secret men's business would be basically what I did for a living. So yeah, very grateful for the journey.
Don't you love it how everything falls into place, and in retrospect you can see it's just all a piece of the puzzle. I love it. All right, let's move in. I'm interested in, you said how old were you when you went to the Catholic rugby playing Australian boarding school?
I was 12 when I went to Nudgee, came down to Brisbane, and yeah, what a wild experience. I was a fish out of water in a big way.
Yeah. Are you religious now?
No, deeply spiritual, but not religious.
How would you describe the difference between religion and spirituality?
To me, religion is a prescribed set of principles and practices that are given and that are put to me as a reference point for someone to attain, and almost looking upwards. This is the station of whatever deity or whatever prophet or whatever aspirational being to aspire to be like. And here are the practices set out by that person to follow and to have a good life. I feel spirituality for me comes from a downward direction. For me, I'm connected into earth. I'm connected into the experience of my body, and the connection into silence and contemplation. And it almost parallels the differences between Eastern and Western spiritual philosophy. I'd say Western would more often put deification, gods, prophets, others to a higher station. And I know that exists in Eastern philosophy as well, but I feel like for me, spirituality is a journey inward and a journey to the place inside myself where I achieve the silence and the peace, if I can achieve it, to find clarity, to find answers, and to find stillness that ultimately has me reflecting on my life and my way of being so that I can have a better life. And I don't feel that one is good or bad or better or worse. I feel like ultimately they may actually be two roads to the same place.
Yeah, and there's so much scope around that, isn't there? And sometimes the lines get a little bit blurred because there can be truth in religion, and there is in the ancient. It's just how it's been manipulated or maybe represented as truth. What would you say to men who are feeling a bit uncomfortable with their religious upbringing and looking for something else, but feeling, in that place of, if you've been brought up around religion and that's all you've known, but starting to realize that maybe there's something else there, what would you say to those men?
First thing I'd say is that in a really classic Aussie saying, it's like there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to arrive at something that's true. And I think the first thing that I know from men I've supported in my work is that they often struggle with the bias and the judgment that often exists with religion. So when they see other practices that might help them achieve certain states of awareness and clarity or states of spiritual deepening, they might think of it as voodoo or witchcraft, or have certain judgments or filters that they have. So the first thing a man would need to do is just take those away and allow yourself to experience and to be exposed to different practices and different philosophies, and begin to feel what feels true. So for me, when I stepped away from my religious upbringing and I started to use plant medicine as a way to journey into myself, and I use practices of holotropic breath work, again, to use breathing to achieve a different state of consciousness, and start to be exposed to ritual and ceremony that wasn't necessarily inside the bounds of a particular religion, I realized that there were so many different ways for me to find clarity and find truth. And my ultimate philosophy is that there's no one answer. It's all different ways of looking at what I feel ultimately is the singular light source. Imagine if you had a different lens or a different shade and pane of glass, looking at something that's bright. You might call it blue, he might call it red, but if you took the glass away, it's actually a white light underneath.
Yeah, so good. And yeah, I'll agree with that. A lot of people use the plant medicine. I never have. And I know other people that haven't. And, so there's no one way. And this is the great part about the journey. And also this series, just unpacking every man's journey and just understanding that there are so many ways. Some come up a lot, which is very interesting. And, but, the more we move through these 100 men, the more spectrum and scope that we're discovering. Now, often what holds men in religion is the guilt and shame that's promoted. So how does a man start to vibrate up out of that oh gosh, what would you call it? That foundation of guilt and shame that religion raises you in?
There's a great concept that I've been taught about, something called the map of consciousness. And it shows the level of vibration or the frequency that exists with different thoughts or emotions. And guilt and shame are lower order mindsets, lower order emotions. And it's going to be really difficult to create a journey of moving to a place of emotional and spiritual freedom if your actions are stowed away or locked in underneath guilt and shame. So I think with that awareness, realizing that guilt and shame are holding a man back and allowing those experiences to come up, also understanding where they've come from and why they were used. Guilt and shame were used by church and other religious and other institutions to control and to create fear, and maybe were historical legacy for when religion needed to have a harsh control mechanism because people were simpler. They were illiterate thousands of years ago when most of the religious scriptures were written. People needed simple motivations to feel fear in order to do something. I think what we now realize is those emotions are not serving. They don't serve from a place of helping men to understand or to ascend into a place of spiritual clarity. And what I mean tangibly by that is it's not going to be productive to stay in an experience of shame. And even in the church, there were mechanisms that they were using to promote alleviating, those feelings. In the Catholic Church, they had confession. It's okay, you've done something wrong, talk about it and say some prayers, forgive yourself, and move on. Remove that specific religious method and replace with your own reflection. It's important to reflect on things if you've done things in your life that you're not proud of. As a man, I feel the principal characteristic of a man is responsibility. It's a principal definition for me of masculinity. And so the first thing for me is, if I'm feeling guilty or ashamed about something, well, why is that? Is that because my parents told me that I should be? Or is that because from a place of objective truth, I can look at that something that I've done or said and feel like that wasn't the right thing to do? And if a man wants to get past those feelings of guilt and shame, get into responsibility for the things that you feel like you genuinely need to take responsibility for, and allow those things to pass, allow them to be in the past. No sense in suppressing them. If you feel like you need to get complete, if you feel like there are things from your past that you've done that you need to make amends for, almost every religious practice in the world, even Alcoholics Anonymous, goes through the 12-step process. One of them is called making a fearless moral inventory. And that basically means go and have a look at all the ways that you might have stuffed up or hurt people, go and apologize for it. So if you've got things to be guilty or shameful about, clean it up and then allow yourself to move on. But if that's a way of being and you're operating inside of a church or a system that's using that as a constant tool, maybe think about whether that's actually serving you.
I love that. So work through it. Are you saying work through it? Don't spiritually bypass it, but don't stay stuck in the swamp of it. Yeah.
100%. Shadow work is what we call some of that in men's work, which is to look at the parts of ourselves that we are afraid to look at. The desires we have, the things we've done, the things we do. It's to look at the shadow, the part of us that we don't necessarily see all the time. And once we bring it into conscious awareness, we can clean it up. We can do something about it.
So good. Jason, what would you say was your rock bottom point as an adult?
Yeah, it's most coaches and men that get into this kind of work will have generally had a rock bottom moment. So it's astute of you to ask the question. I was, for a bit of context, young father, working in the mining industry as a professional. I did what's called business improvement. So I would help businesses to improve their profitability and improve their safety performance. And I was working for some big mining companies, living in Brisbane, flying in, flying out. So, on paper, my life was pretty good. I had a wife, I had a young son, was quite successful, tick, tick, tick. And behind closed doors, it was a very different picture. My wife suffered from bipolar disorder and had attempted suicide on multiple occasions while we were together. And a rock bottom moment really kind of had two parts. The first part was I'd had a pretty unproductive relationship with alcohol. My wife and I were also using recreational drugs on the weekends, and we had a big argument one night. And one morning I came out and found her on the floor of the kitchen table in a pretty awkward position, realizing that's probably would have been comfortable, so she wouldn't be conscious. And there was a bottle of pills that had been, emptied along the floor. So I pretty quickly put two and two together and realized, the worst may have happened. And the disturbing part about it was I didn't actually feel any emotion. I actually felt quite numb at the time. She threatened it a long time and had attempted a couple of times. And I thought, oh, wow, she's finally done it. And at that point, I realized there was something really, really wrong with the way my life was set up. So, that was kind of the beginning of a downward spiral. And after separating and divorcing, I really went to all the most unproductive places to support myself. I didn't have tribe. I didn't have brotherhood. I didn't have mentors. I didn't really have a place to go to share what I was dealing with. So I kind of bottled it all up and used alcohol, dating, relationships with women, dating apps, porn. Just sex addiction was my flavor, and just continued to go in a downward spiral. And by about the third unsuccessful relationship, I actually had somebody give me some feedback and said, of the 11 indicators of a narcissist, you meet 9 of them. And I was like, wow, okay. Now, I've since realized that if I was a true narcissist, I wouldn't have been able to hear that feedback and do something about it. And I've also done some work to understand that a fair bit of what she was co-creating with me in that relationship was a dynamic that each of us was co-creating. But there was enough truth and there was enough impact in that statement to realize I needed to do something about my life and the outcomes I was getting. So I went along to a men's workshop in 2018 and spent 3-4 days with the most amazing men I'd ever met. And yeah, it changed the direction of my life.
So that was your first step. There are two things I'm interested to cover here. The first one, and we have spoken about men, lots of men who, in our Heart Warrior series that were at one point on the brink of suicide. But I feel it's important to bring up this subject of when your partner is threatening or on the brink or attempting suicide. So let's open this subject. And if someone's going through that, what advice would you give them?
I've got to be really careful here because I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a counselor. So I just want to caveat that seek professional advice and professional support is the first thing that I want to say in any situation like this. If you believe your partner is genuinely attempting to or threatening to take their life, call 000. On a number of occasions, I did do that. And the police were incredibly responsive. They knew, the support to provide my partner. My ex-partner was hospitalized and she was taken to a mental health care facility. So if you're at that critical phase and your current partner or someone you care about has threatened it and you believe that they are genuine in that threat, call 000. Is the best course of action. If you identify that a partner or a loved one may be showing signs or talking about suicidal ideation, Lifeline is a service that I recommend. If you're in a financial position to be able to afford to seek professional help in terms of a psychologist or a psychiatrist, highly recommends that people consider going to that level of support before it gets to the place where people are really thinking about how to take their lives. And again, peeling it back a bit again, if you are feeling low or if you're feeling down or depressive and it's not yet down the road where you're considering self-harm or someone is considering self-harm, the first thing I tell people who are in a tough place is go and find someone to help. Not help you. Go and find someone you can help. It's one of the most powerful triggers for a set of neurochemicals in our body and our brain to have us feel really good is when we contribute to someone else, especially if they're in a more challenging situation than us. It gives us a few things. It gives us perspective when we realize there are other people out there who have got it tougher than we have. It gives us gratitude for the things that we do have in our lives. And it also gives us all these reward chemicals that we feel, because human beings we were evolved to live in tribes. And the tribes that were most successful evolved with a feeling of happiness and well-being when they contributed to each other. Because if the tribes were all working individually, for themselves, they wouldn't have survived. So evolution has geared us and designed us to work really, really well together. So find someone that you can contribute to, and I can guarantee you will feel better.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, I totally get that too. Yeah. I'm interested in, I think this is important as well. How do you get out of a relationship with someone who is at that same time suicidal? Because I haven't been there, but I can only imagine that it's twice as more difficult as getting out of a, let's say, average relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. And it's actually the situation I found myself in, is staying from guilt. And if you're in a situation where a partner is using suicide as a threat to not allow you to leave your relationship, I guess the first few practical steps I would say was seek support from your own friends and family first, looking for the support networks that you have available for yourself so that you can share the challenges that you're experiencing. You can reach out and ask advice. You can share what you're going through, because most often, most men don't tell people what they're dealing with. That's 90% of what is going on. So for men, if you've got a partner, a woman, even or a man, who's threatening suicide or is potentially going to have that as part of the picture, then you want to leave, get support for yourself first. Once you have that, support your partner as best as you can, though it's not your responsibility, trying to get the support that they need, whether that's the support of counselors, psychologists, family members, friends and family. Make some effort to have them supported. Having said that, The challenge men have, I feel, is that they take responsibility for other people's well-being, often more than they take responsibility for their own well-being. So don't take responsibility for someone else's mental health. It's not your job to have someone else feel good about their life. It's not your job to have someone else feeling happy. So look after yourself first. In the airplane, when you're flying, they say put your own mask on first and then help someone else. That's what men need to learn to do. And so when you've actually started to develop your own sense of well-being, you start to talk to people, you start to share about the challenges, you'll start to get perspectives back. People will say, hey, that's probably not okay. The way that situation is evolving or developing. I know a number of men, myself included, who've actually been in physically abusive relationships, have been on the receiving end of abuse. And most men won't talk about it because it's something that's very, very shameful. And emotional abuse is included in that. So once men start to reach out and get that support, they start to develop a sense of, hey, this is actually not right. This is actually not okay what's going on. And over time, with that support, you can start to develop the self-confidence, the self-assurance, the self-esteem, and the worthiness that says, actually, you know what? It's actually not okay. These behaviors are not okay. So then starting to set boundary and actually say, you know what? If this behavior continues, this is going to be the consequence. I'm going to have to remove myself from the situation. Starting to set healthy boundaries, not in the way of a threat, but in the way of self-preservation and in the way of sovereignty and in the way of healthy, boundary setting. Hey, this is actually not something that I'm actually wanting in my life. I don't welcome this. I'm not available for this. These are things that you can set within yourself. And over time, that will start to draw clarity for your partner that those behaviors are not acceptable. And that ultimately, and look, people's situations can be so complicated. So I don't want to give one set of advice that applies to everybody. There may be children, there may be shared homes. I deal with hundreds of men, and no two men's situation is the same. But ultimately, if you're in a situation that feels like it's not right, you have a sovereign right to remove yourself from a position where it's no longer serving you. And ultimately, if someone else is making a decision that has to do with their mental health, their well-being, ultimately, you can't control that. So allowing yourself to give yourself permission to extricate yourself from a situation that doesn't serve you, ultimately. That's going to be the source of access to, if you are already decided you want to leave. If you want to support the person during that process and you want to stay, all those same principles apply. Healthy boundary, support for the other person, support for yourself. That's what I would say to somebody who is in that situation.
Yeah, so good. And as you said, it's such a tangled web. And, we've done a whole episode of Man Speak with Aaron Schultz on domestic violence, but it really was about men hurting women. So I love that you've raised this topic, because it is just as important and even more hushed up, as you said, because, there's a whole, I know from the women, having been there as well, that, there's a lot of guilt and shame around why we'd stay. And I imagine even more so with men. Is there anything else that needs to be said on that subject? Even, the fact of, you had a child there as well that needs to be shared to help men, or shall we move on?
I think for me, ultimately, the journey was taking responsibility for what I had created, taking responsibility for what I had allowed, and taking responsibility for how I felt about myself that created and co-created those relationship dynamics. When I started looking inward and started doing the work within myself, over time, those situations were no longer in my life anymore, because I created the certainty of exactly what it is that I wanted. I decided what I was a yes for and decided what I was a no for. And that allowed me to support in all of those relationships.
Yeah, that's so good. That responsibility, self-accountability. And that brings up the subject of victimhood. Was there any point in that relationship that you saw yourself as a victim? And if you did, how did you overcome that hurdle? Because I always say this is a pivotal point on the healing journey to get over that state of perceived victimhood.
Definitely. Even in my languaging, when I speak about the fact that I was in a challenging relationship and I had an ex-partner who had serious mental health issues, I am subtly saying that from a place of feeling like that was a hard situation for me. But the work that I've done since to look back helps me understand that if I hadn't experienced that, I wouldn't be doing the work that I am now. So for me, transitioning from a place of this happened to me to a place of this happened for me allows me to see the reason why or the purpose I can take out of a situation, even if it was challenging.
Love it, love it. That's exactly, how you get over it, right? For seeing a higher meaning for life. Would you agree with that? And for you,
Yeah.
what is that meaning? Like, did that open up what you see now as your mission? As let's add some context to that understanding.
If I didn't have the hardship or the challenge of dealing with, experiencing marriage breakdown, single parenthood, and the various things that happened to me, I wouldn't have gone down the road of personal development. I wouldn't have gone to that men's workshop. I wouldn't have then gone into men's work and create the work that I'm doing to help men improve themselves in their lives. And my work is not focused on men in crisis. It's not focused on dealing with men with depression and with suicide. It's focused on helping men to find purpose and to find meaning in their life. So the journey I went on was to experience hardship in order to find purpose. And now using that, alchemizing that for men to say, what's the pain that you've experienced and how can you convert that into purpose? Who can you help with what you've experienced in your life? Who do you feel passionately about contributing to? Because it's something that's close to your heart. So yeah, I've almost one for one used that experience and leveraged it in a way to, firstly, to understand what men are going through. I can't stand from a place of transformation if I've had it all roses and it was all smooth sailing. And it's like, yeah, transform your life. And it's like, cool, what have you been through? Nothing, I'm good. It was all fine. Have a great life. Well, no, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for all of it. And from that place of having experienced difficulty, I can also help inspire men who might be having their own flavor of the same to say, whatever it is that you're dealing with, whatever life's thrown at you, not to say that I've seen it all or that I've been through worse, but there's so many examples in life of people who've come out the other side and had an incredible, prosperous, abundant life, successful life, happy life, meaningful life. So it can be done. I've done a version of it. Here's what I did to help. Here's what I found was helpful for me. And let's do this together.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this series is about. And, as I said, I think you're 47. There's going to be 100 examples of men that have done it their way. Oh, yes. I just wanted to add to that. What you're saying is so true. And I know also with my own journey, you can't help people by reading a textbook, right? And the men and women who have experienced and actually spiraled up to then create peace and love and abundance in their life, they come from a totally different lived experience in order to be able to help and share authentic life story instead of words they've learned in university from a book.
Agreed.
Yeah. Let's get into the plant medicine that you said helped you. What exactly was that, and how did it help you?
So I had a deep curiosity to journey with ayahuasca, having heard about it for a number of years from influential people like Aubrey Marcus, who has spoken about their work. So Aubrey Marcus, the podcaster, an author. He spoke about his work in the Amazon, and I was intending to go before COVID, and that kind of put a spanner in the works. And in 2020, I was invited to sit in ceremony with a group who were facilitating a peyote circle. They were members of the Native American Church, which is a group out of Mexico, and sat in circle and ceremony for 12 hours, sitting around a fire in a beautiful ceremony at the Sunshine Coast. There was members of that facilitation group that traveled from all over Australia to be there, and the facilitator traveled from Mexico, facilitated that ceremony. What did I get out of that experience? As anybody that has done plant medicine will tell you, it's very, very difficult to convey in words when your entire reality gets turned inside out, flipped upside down, put back together again, and maybe reassembled without some pieces. But the closest I can sort of tangibly explain is that peyote ceremony, for example, was an experience of like living a life in one night. I felt time bend in on itself. And I felt at the end of that night, like almost best I could describe it as like an 80-year-old man. And I was observing conversations with people in there who were interacting in their humanness, speaking negatively about somebody or speaking about something else. And I just remember feeling like a grandparent watching my grandchildren playing, and one of them gets a scabby knee and they say, oh, it's hurting so much, it's really painful. And I can just see with wisdom, they'll be okay. I could see in observation. So in spiritual terms, Eckhart Tolle talks about being the observer, being the watcher of your own thoughts. That was an experience I had during the peyote ceremony. So deep sense of wisdom and observation. And very soon after, I was very much back into my humanness. In fact, I came home from that peyote ceremony, had an argument with my girlfriend. So it was, the work starts with when the medicine stops. Because the medicine gives us a window into what's possible, or gives us a window into a state of consciousness that we have access to. But we very much contract after the experience and return back to the egoic self. And then the work starts there to expand our consciousness and our sense of love and our sense of compassion and all the beautiful things that we experience when in the medicine. And since then, I've journeyed with a number of other different, plant medicines, ayahuasca, psilocybin, San Pedro, and it's all been really different and very profound. It's very, very challenging. Oh, just imagine spending 4 hours looking at all the ways in which you had been out of integrity, and you were just shown it over and over and over and over again. And it's like, okay, thank you, I've received the message. And it's like, no, you haven't. Here it is again. And just keep watching it, keep looking at it. You're like, oh my God.
What was that with?
Oh, that was with psilocybin. So just and ranging from that kind of experience, which was harrowing and challenging, all the way through to blissful love, oneness, unity with the universe. I've experienced a journey where I became my own inner child. And under a blanket, I was watching movies. There was no movies there. I was playing games, telling stories, having full conversations with myself, giving my inner child healing and validation and reassurance, and hearing him say things that he'd never been given an opportunity to say. He told me stories about when the volcano had erupted when I was a child, and how nobody had ever asked him if he was okay, and how he, so many of his friends, he never saw them again. And he's like, he lost his home and his school and everything. And he's like, nobody ever really asked me, how I felt about all these things. So it was almost like counseling myself as a child. And medicine can give us access to experiences that we may not otherwise experience. So in that way, it's been a beautiful tool in the arsenal of tools that has helped me to understand and heal myself.
So fascinating. Were there any other tools or practices that were pivotal to you spiraling up? And what were they?
Still, the most profound breakthroughs and healing I've ever experienced has been through holotropic breath work. Even with all the medicine work and even with other different practices I've experienced, it stands head and shoulders above, others in terms of clarity. I can remember the things that I experienced. I had profound shifts that changed a lot of things permanently, released a lot of trauma from my body. I believe, and I think there's a lot of people who would agree with me, that the experiences we have in life can often be retained in trauma physiologically in our body. And when you get an opportunity to be facilitated with breath work in a somatic way, so when you breathe, and just for context, for people who may not understand what I mean, holotropic breath work is a practice where we breathe consistently for us in a certain way for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we achieve something like a dream state. So the front part of our brain actually gets deprioritized as our oxygen carbon dioxide levels go into a different balance to what they are normally. So our extremities and our fingers and toes and our nose and our ears start to go numb, and then our brain actually gets reprioritized to the different parts of our brain. So we access stored memories, we can relive events from childhood, we can effectively live a dream state while we're partly conscious. So for those who don't know, so holotropic breath work has been massive, just allowed me to release trauma, let go of the past, get clarity about my future, receive direction and downloads about where I'm going next. A lot has come through in that practice.
Now, this is the first time I'm hearing about this during the series. Is it something you have to do with a facilitator, or can we do it alone? Because I want to try this.
Yeah. So I would strongly recommend being supervised by someone in the practice of holotropic breath work. The best practice would be to go and be facilitated by somebody who is a trained breathwork practitioner. So that's gold standard. Having said that, I know that people may be in remote areas, they may not have access to that facility. You can look up on YouTube different instructional videos on how to achieve different breathwork states. So you have things like Wim Hof breathwork, which is quite an entry level. And then you start to get into what we call DMT breathwork, which starts to get to more, deeper work. And then you get to what we call holotropic or rebreathing breathwork, which has been around since the 60s. It's not a new practice. It's just becoming more popular these days. If you do decide to go and self-direct your own breathwork journey, please do so in a safe environment. Don't do it around water. I have actually had a close personal friend pass away doing breathwork and combining it with cold immersion. So don't combine deep breathing practice and breath holds with cold water if you're on your own and if you're not supervised. But if you are going to do deep breathing holotropic practice, do so above water, do so where it's going to be physically safe, and do so with somebody with you.
Oh, great advice. Are we able to put any of those YouTube links in the comments below as, recommended resources? Because I'd rather do ones that you've actually, accessed and used instead of ones that I randomly find. So we'll drop those into the links. Thank you. I can't wait to try this. I won't do it near water. I'll lock the door.
There's a great YouTube channel for a breathwork facilitator that, if you're doing your own independent research, I'll definitely share one. But if you're doing your research and you find them online, there are lots on YouTube. And a general rule of thumb is if they've got a lot of views and they're a popular channel and they're well regarded, well reviewed, generally that comes from being popular from people having watched it and used it. So I find it tends to be a good rule of thumb if they're highly viewed on YouTube. But holotropic breathwork. Where are you based, Gemma?
I'm in Noosa.
Oh God.
Where are you? I know you're in Queensland. Where are you?
I'm in Brisbane.
Oh wow.
Gemma, if you want to experience holotropic breathwork, jump on Facebook and just look up breathwork workshop or holotropic breathing or shamanic breathing. There would be dozens going on up in the Sunshine Coast. They are all over the region. I thought you were in the Northern Territory.
Well, I was last week. This is a virtual backdrop because it's the energies of Kata Judah, the sacred masculine site that have come through for this series. So that's amazing. Why we have Kata Judah there. But so I was there for 10 days. I just got back on Christmas Day.
Amazing.
So definitely you're the first one after that. So bringing these energies For sure. Oh, definitely try that. Thank you. Now we've got about half an hour left, Jason. What else needs to be brought into this conversation that you can help men with who are on the journey into the heart, or, suffering at the moment in a helpless state or wanting resources? What can you contribute to their arsenal of tools, insights, wisdom?
Oh, it's a big, broad question, and I love it. Thank you. There's so many places I could go, but if I can describe maybe the most effective things that have been useful in my journey, and really give a simple framework that men can use to start to take their wherever they are on the journey. The work that I do divides men's being into 4 pillars: body, mind, heart, and soul. And it's not unique to men. Obviously, it applies to women as well. But this is the journey I've had for myself. For me, the journey began with the body. If I have disconnection, and what actually may be helpful for me is even to take a step further back. The philosophy inside the work that I do in the Primal Man Project helps men to identify that we're living a long way from the way we were designed to live. And what I do is I help men go from living by default to living by design. And living by default generally tends to look like this. You've got a job, you might have a partner, the kids, the mortgage, the holiday 2 weeks a year, you've got the bills to pay. Life feels like a bit of a hamster wheel. You feel like you're kind of just going through the motions. Living by default is what I call that. You might have a job that you don't really like. You might have got into it because your old man said it was a good idea. You may really just not be feeling very lit up about your life or about the way things are going. And that was me. That was me 5 years ago. And I was overweight, I was unhappy, and I was unfulfilled. And where I started was to start a connection or start a relationship with my body. Getting into physical health is the first step, I feel, in order for all other things to gateway and to kind of cascade from there in terms of growth. So for me, I go back to really simple principles in the thinking about what we used to eat as best I can understand, or best as we can understand. We wouldn't have been shopping down the supermarket aisles, getting crap out of a packet and eating stuff that came out of cans and eating things with names of chemicals that I can't even pronounce. I really don't think that that's very in great service to our physiology. So as best I can, I try to eat as much of what I can from natural whole foods and start to get an understanding of what the calories in and calories out. So just understanding what my body needs, not eating out of habit by default, but eating by design. I have used practices like fasting, for example, skipping breakfast, and allowing my body to actually be in a state of a little bit of hunger, not getting attached to the story that I need to eat constantly and eating sugary, refined, processed crap. Having a practice of resistance training. Men especially, if you are not lifting heavy things at least 3 times a week, your testosterone is going to be lower, your energy is going to be lower, your muscular definition and your physicality is not going to be working in the way our bodies were designed for. We were designed to be very physical, designed to be very active, outdoors, chasing, hunting our food, and 90% of us live a long way from the way we were supposed to physically. So moving more, eating less, eating whole foods, and starting to develop a relationship with our bodies. That's pillar number 1. And once I start to create that connection with my body, I start to understand practices like breathing, just simple breathwork practices. I'll share a link to the site that I found most useful on YouTube. Just developing a relationship with my breath allows me to then gateway into the next pillar, which is my mind. If I can control my breath and be at alignment with what my body needs, I can start to understand what's going on in my mind. Most men will start to see the busyness, the chaoticness, the lack of peace, the lack of stillness, because their mind's going 100 miles an hour. Generally, what they're doing is they're drinking lots of coffee during the day and they're drinking alcohol at night in order to stimulate, to get to the peak of what they need to do to get their work done, and then depress themselves again because they're so jacked up on all this caffeine. So stimulants and depressants has men's mind going 1,000,000 miles an hour. What do they do when they get home? Click on Netflix, get on social media, and what are you doing? More stimulation, more dopamine, more stuff that has our brains thinking it's daytime and we're out looking for stuff. So men's relationship with their mind can't come without an understanding of what's going on with their body. Once they start to understand those things and they start to put themselves into uncomfortable situations, working out, lifting heavy, going for a run, being hungry, breath work practices, these things are uncomfortable. They're not what we're doing normally to feel comfortable. They're uncomfortable. You'll start to meet the edges of what your mind is actually capable of. Anyone that's done really big, long workouts, anyone who's ever done CrossFit, anyone's ever gone for a 10K run, they'll tell you it's not about the body. The body can go for a long time. It's about what happens in the mind. So doing those things regularly also start to hone and sharpen your mind. Once you start to get that relationship going and you start to see what's on the inside of your mind, you'll realize, what kind of thoughts am I having? Am I having positive thoughts? Am I having optimistic thoughts? Are they based on opportunity? Most people don't start that way. They start with the most common language and thought process, which is, fuck my job, fuck my boss, fuck my girlfriend, and not in the good way. Just what, like, this is all shit. It's all negative. It's all bad. That's what media is telling us. It's what most conversation is. And unless you're down the pub having a beer, you're generally not speaking positive words to other men. So practices for the mind, gratitude. Simple daily practice. Wake up. I fill in my gratitude journal. I'll share a link to it here in our show notes for a simple app that I use. I just put down 3 things I'm grateful for, 3 things I'm going to do today, and 3 things I want to confirm about myself. What do I want to believe about myself for the day? An affirmation. And it's just a really simple practice to start doing what I call mental hygiene, thinking in a way that's going to support me. And as I start doing these things, I'm like, wow, this feels really good. I want to think about maybe learning some more stuff. So practice number 2 in the mind is positive input. In the same way that we feed our bodies positive things, we're thinking about the food we're putting in our bodies. What's the food that we're putting in our minds? Are we just getting on this thing and scrolling through TikTok through random clips of funnies and all that sort of, it's all good, no judgment, but is that really what's healthy? Well, I'd be much rather reading these things, the books up on the shelf, or podcasts, audiobooks, beautiful series like this. If you're listening to this, you're probably already a guy who's on this train already. He's like, yep, cool, I've got my podcast, I've got my audiobooks, awesome. Then that's from a feeding perspective, right? So in the body, we have healthy food going in, resistance training and physical activity kind of going out. In the mind, we have positive content going in. What we want to be doing is planning for the future in the mind. So that's in this pillar of the mind. We're like, okay, well, where am I going? What am I doing with my life? What's the next 12 months? What's the next 5 years? Thinking about things like, what's important to me? Is family important to me? Is travel important to me? Is variety, spontaneity? Am I in the kind of work that I want to be doing? Unless we start to actually make plans for our life, generally other people's plans will be what we do.
So good.
Yeah. So that's the second pillar in the mind. The third, once we're starting to develop a relationship with our bodies, once we're starting to get healthier, once we're starting to move, once we're starting to think clearly, make plans for our future, we're going to start to uncover and discover the things that are there in the hearts that need to be healed. And it sounds a bit woo-woo, and I suspect that your audience is probably already on board with this kind of thing. But if you're new to the growth journey, the way we live in the modern world has trauma built into our society. We used to live in tribes. We used to be raised where when we were born, we'd have 100 sets of hands to be passed around to and be loved by and be shown attention from. We now live with probably 2, often 1 caregiver, parent. So despite their best efforts, we're probably born and raised with a sense of isolation, a sense of abandonment. Despite their best efforts, our parents may have done a great job, a sense of not enough, a sense of feeling like nothing we do is worthy. Those are things that come from, based on the work that I've done, the way that our society is structured. And we kind of can't really help it. So most of us, I'd say 95%, are already pre-built with trauma. We're raised with trauma already stacked in to the system. So we've got to do the work. You got to do the work to heal the heart. And the things that I've done to heal the heart, breath work. Release the past, release the trauma, release the sadness, sitting in circle. If you don't have access to a men's circle, find one. There is a very beautiful thing that happens for men when we share, sometimes for the first time, how we actually feel, how what's happened to us in our life has actually had us feeling. So releasing that. The second pillar of the heart is tribe. Who are your tribe? Most men do it pretty much alone. Most men are lone wolfing it. And I was definitely one of those guys. I was lone wolfing it for most of my adult life, thinking I had to do it all on my own. And it doesn't have to be that way. Find the people in your life that you can connect to as a tribe. People who, there's a great saying I love, is you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you look at your results and you look at your friendship circle, chances are you'll be emulating the people around you. And if those people are not serving you, it's time to find new people. So that's the third pillar in the heart. Once you've created a relationship with your body, clarified where you're going, and created mental hygiene, done the work in inner healing, connected with tribe who are of service, it starts to feel like you're getting somewhere. And then you'll generally find you'll have a space that will open up. When you sit quietly within yourself after you've done this work for healing, you'll actually have the silence. And inside that silence is the language of the universe. And that is the truth that comes through when we've done the work to create peace and stillness inside. And that's the work of the soul, is finding that deeper inner truth that we all have access to. And if anybody tells you otherwise, they want you to buy something.
Good one.
We all
Go on. Is there any more to that?
Those are the 4 pillars.
Oh, amazing. I have so much gratitude, just the way you've worked through that. No one, I don't think, on this series has put it so beautifully from A to Z. So really, thank you so much for that, Jason.
You're so welcome.
Beautiful share there. Wow. And as a woman, that's all stuff that I've done as well. But the men's work is different. I love how you said, most men, and the masculine energy of women, no doubt, is that lone wolf, where you feel very isolated, because as women, we often do have girlfriends that, even if, we're going round in circles, at least we're blabbing, and we're, when you're at that stage, I don't do it anymore because it just keeps you in the loop. But at that stage, it's important to release it. Whereas men, maybe they're not like that. So this men's circle is pivotal. How would you describe healthy masculinity?
Starts with taking responsibility, as I shared earlier, for me. Taking responsibility of the life that I've created, of the results that I'm getting, even the things that are happening to me, I can see from a perspective of, have I called this in? Have I created this? So first step for me, healthy masculinity says, everything that's in my world is my responsibility. And if it's absolutely outside of my control, then how I respond to something still is in my responsibility. Even in the concentration camps in World War II in Auschwitz, the author, I'll find this quote on my vision board, is Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl talked about, even in the worst possible situation, we can take responsibility for our own inner realm. We can choose how to respond. So for me, regardless of what's going on outside, masculinity means this is my responsibility. How I am and what I'm doing is my responsibility. My life is my responsibility. For me, that's pillar number 1 in masculinity. Second for me, pillar is contribution. Okay, I'm responsible for my inner realm. I'm responsible for who I am. I'm responsible for the results I'm getting. what impact am I now having on those around me? Am I being in contribution to the world and to community and to my family? Not to the detriment of self, because that often happens with men as well. They put others first. Is responsibility. That's why it starts with responsibility. Responsible for self means also saying no. Masculinity for me is a man who is grounded in his ability to represent himself as well. So, hey, this works for me, or hey, this actually doesn't work for me. Helping you and doing all those things for you is actually not actually in service for me. So I'm going to say no. Those things are all part of responsibility. Contribution. And then
maybe, can I just ask a question in the middle of that? When you say contribution, are you talking about only financially, or is there what other ways?
Mental, emotional, physical, spiritual contribution. Contribution to somebody may just be sitting in silence and listening. And often with men, that's something that we need to get better at doing, because we want to fix it. A woman comes to us, our partners come to us, this is going on, this is going on. Just listen. Yeah. Hearing people, being deeply present with someone is a contribution. Offering support where it's asked for or where it's welcomed is a contribution. And support may be a hand on a shoulder. It may be a phone call. It may be, hey, this is what I did when I was dealing with something similar. That might be helpful for you. That's a contribution. Contribution doesn't mean writing a check to a charity. Or doesn't just mean that. You could do that. That's awesome. Contribution may mean just volunteering. It may mean doing a really good job in your choice of employment. Your chosen obligations, doing them with honor and responsibility. So contribution is very broad.
Yeah, I love that. And I just wanted to clarify that, because there's a lot in the polarity world about a men's contribution being providing financially, but I know it is so much broader than that. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah, I did read someone's post the other day that they said it's always a good, when someone comes to you with a problem, like to ask, do you want me to offer solutions, or are you asking just for me to listen? So I think for men and for women, that's really important. And I made a mental note to incorporate that into my life, because I'm very good at offering solutions as well. And even though this series is teaching me to listen, and now I'm on a totally different wavelength, so I love it.
I thought that was just a men thing. I thought we were classic at just needing to just shut up and listen and not offer fix. That's something that's present for solution-orientated women, eh?
Well, when you've done the journey and you just know what you would do in that situation and how it's helped you, it's so easy just to offer that as a potential, this is all you have to do. But, learning to shut up, and yes, it works for both of us. Where else does this conversation need to go, Jason, that we haven't covered?
Yeah, I feel...
Sorry, before I interrupted and asked you to expand on contribution, was that thread finished?
So masculinity was the question you asked. What does healthy masculinity look like? And I've not yet put together for me like a really sound 4-part, 4 pillars kind of model. I'm still working on that for myself. But some other things that come to mind. Contribution can also be mentorship, and also receiving mentorship. So eldership and tribe are a big part of what I feel is really missing in masculine, in the modern world for men. And, there was a time in our evolution where we would all, men from boys right through to the grave, have had leaders and elders and mentors and uncles and people who we could look to learn from, and also distinguish ourselves from, but people who we could receive that guidance and leadership. And I think a big part of the way that men can really change the landscape of masculinity is to provide leadership, provide leadership to younger men, and also to receive from elders, to be a part of those who desire to give us leadership. And I've been so lucky to have incredible mentors. Blaze, who you've had on the program a couple of times, is a former mentor and coach of mine. And I consider Aaron Schultz to be a man I would consider an elder and a mentor of sorts. And I just feel that we as men need to look for opportunities to give and to receive leadership.
Love it. Where does, let's say, the balance of freedom and love come into masculinity?
Help me understand what you mean.
Okay, well, ideally, we all want to feel free, and we also all want to give love and freedom. So I'll be talking about relationships here. In your perspective, how can a couple balance love and freedom in a relationship?
I'm in a relationship dynamic where I have a strong role of leadership, and I'm with a partner who has desired to and chosen the experience of surrender in a sense of sovereignty, but also allowing there to be real clarity between the two of us, that when we are together, that ultimately she looks to leadership from me. When we are looking for where we're going as a couple in our direction in life or in a day-to-day, she has equal contribution, but she's ultimately looking to the masculine to lead. And so there's, to me, a certain amount of freedom that's inherent in that love. She would describe it, I don't want to speak for her, but she's a teacher in this area, and she says there's a great amount of freedom in surrender. So when she loves and trusts me as a man, she sees me as solid and integral and grounded, and she trusts where I'm going and where I'm taking us, where I'm leading us. She says that in her surrender, there's actually freedom. So I'm not sure if that was necessarily inside of the direction of where you wanted it to go, but that's what's present for me in my relationship. And in the same way, I find an incredible amount of love, an incredible amount of freedom in the expression of love that I have for a woman who's incredibly sovereign. So she has, I know, an ability to exist in the world independent from me. And if we were to not relate anymore, she would thrive. She would continue to thrive in the world. And so I've experienced freedom through knowing that she's solid and she's sovereign within herself. She experiences freedom in knowing that she's surrendered. So we exist at the opposite polarity and the masculine and the feminine versions of the freedom that each of us find in the love in how we choose to express it.
Yeah, that's such a great perspective. And as a woman, I would like to add on to that by saying the freedom for the feminine comes with us not having to think, for us to be able to trust the leadership of the man, that we don't have to be in our head, so we can be in our heart, and just that flowing, expressive, dancing, singing, of the feminine, because we trust the man to take us where we need to go. But as you said, at the same time, when we're by ourselves, we've got our inner masculine developed enough that we can call on him to, take us where we need to go. So we're not helpless or, sort of not able to do it ourselves, just that the dynamic of the healthy masculine feminine plays out in the individual when we're alone, in the relationship when we're in that dynamic, but also in the community and extended into the world. So I just wanted to add on that perspective as the feminine.
Yeah. Love that. Yeah. And my experience of that has been that rings true for my relationship with Emma as well. So really appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, great. What have you got to say around fatherhood? How old have you?
That's
the one child?
Yeah, I've got a 13-year-old son.
Oh, good age.
Yeah, it's a great age. It's awesome. He's about to do his rite of passage this year. So he's booked in for the Rite of Passage Institute in March. What have I got to say about fatherhood? I could do another hour and a half podcast on that, Gemma.
Well,
Let me
let's
give
say
it.
five, 10 minutes. Let's get
Yeah,
the
I'll give it.
main juice
Yeah,
out.
yeah, I'll give it brief. I didn't really understand what it was to be a man until I became a father. And on some level, I feel like I would challenge a man who has not become a father or taken on significant responsibility of another to have really experienced the depth of what it is to be a man. And that's not to put any disparagement on anyone who hasn't had that opportunity, but I just feel for myself, I was a boy until I became a father. And I still also know that there are men who experience fatherhood and still don't choose to step into responsibility and don't choose to step into the role as what I would call a man. A man takes responsibility for his obligations. So for me, the role of fatherhood and the journey I've been on is it's a daily ground for growth. As much as is my relationship with my partner or my relationships have been, my experience of fatherhood has taught me so much, taught me compassion, taught me understanding, taught me leadership, taught me when the sword is needed, when the heart is needed, when, leadership and clarity, discernment. It's been, yeah, I'd say my equal greatest teacher. And it's the thing that I would tell you 5 years ago before I did any of the personal development work. It was the only thing I could honestly, genuinely tell you I was good at. So it's something that I have as part of me, strongly resonates for my identity, for my values, for who I am as a man. My son lives with me 100%. I have 100% custody of my son. So yeah, fatherhood it's been an honor and privileged to be gifted an opportunity to share my life with a young man who I get to impart on as much as he will listen, as much as he's willing to receive from me, which sometimes feels like it's not much.
It's such a pivotal age, isn't it? The 13. Wow. What's the most important tip you can give to men around parenting a 13-year-old?
To me, it's about finding the correct balance between supportive, unconditional love and supportive, boundaried guidance. So having the role of being a single dad, I've had to be the compassionate, nurturing, kindly parent, and also the firm, clear, boundaried leader, creating consequence and creating encouragement and support for positive direction. So to me, finding that balance is something that I'm always working on, adjusting. I feel like I'm kind of going too far one way, so I need to just minor. But the adjustments are becoming less, because one of the things I've found is if I'm really clear and consistent in my standards and in the boundaries and expectations I'm setting as a father, I don't have to overcorrect. And if I'm consistent in the reinforcement of the positive behaviors that I'm seeing and the encouragement and the love and the affection and the presence that I'm giving, I don't have to overcorrect with guilt or, I've definitely been through that journey of like buying things from him too much because he's a single child and having a feeling of parenting him out of guilt and just saying yes to things that are not healthy for him and overcorrecting, in the support and love, being loose with boundaries and being too soft, and then also being too hard. If I'm consistent in both, I can be more balanced in my approach, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Love it. Jason, where can people find you?
I'm most active on Facebook and Instagram. And most active is probably a loose word. I don't post very much on social media. So Primal Man Project is the name of the movement. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. We have a Facebook community is probably where men can be most receiving of the work that we do. If you go to the Facebook page or my Facebook profile, you'll find a link to the Facebook group. It's called the Primal Council, and we'll put a link to all of that in the show notes. It's a community of over 500 men from 20 countries around the world. We have our free men's circle online. We run masterclasses and educational events, and we offer trainings in there. We share events. We share about events we've got upcoming, which I would love to share about here if you're okay for me to briefly mention the work that we've got coming up. Yeah, we have a 3-day retreat, which I'm really excited about hosting at the end of January. 26, 27, 28, 29. So 26th to 29th of January, it is the 3-day Sharpen the Spear Primal Man Project retreat. So it's a men's embodiment journey through all of the archetypes that we use in men's work. So the king, the warrior, the lover, and the magician. It's a journey through the archetypes, having experiences, embodied experiences of masculinity. It's a powerful 3-day experience here in Brisbane, 2 hours northwest. If you're interested in getting details, I'll put a link to jump on a call and have a chat with me if it's something that men are interested to hear more about.
So good. Okay, and I'd like to wrap up with your final message to men.
The experience of life is too short to not live life by your design. We are here to have happy, healthy, and fulfilling lives. And if anything in your life is anything less, it's available to you to have as much as you want. There is abundance available to all men, in our lives. And yeah, we only get one that we know of. So make the most of it.
Amazing. Well, what a great episode. Thank you so much, Jason. The amount of wisdom and practical advice and experience tools, just so much abundance there. Thank you. I'm really appreciative. And no doubt we'll be having you back on Man Speak at some point. So I just want to thank you from me and the audience. And I'd just like to thank everyone for watching. And I'll be back soon with another episode of Heart Warriors.
Thank you so much, Gemma. And I just want to acknowledge you. There are very few women that I know who have taken such an incredible, who've taken on this, mantle of bringing men forward and empowering and supporting men in the way that you are. It is a very rare woman who can really advocate with her heart for the challenges that men experience. So I just want to thank you deeply on behalf of men, from all the men that have been helped and been supported, and also all the men who've been showcased and put forward by you. It's an amazing thing that you're doing here. So keep doing it.
Thank you so much. And we can also thank Katajuda for that, because I always say that I didn't plan this, but somewhere along my journey, it was planned for me. So
thank you, Katajuda.
I actually woke up one morning and I'm like, oh, I'm going to interview men. Okay, I need a YouTube channel. And that's basically the short story, so can't take all the credit, but I'm very grateful to be the one here, because I'm getting so much out of it as well. And a lot of our audience is actually women, and it's been so beautiful, because I feel that every man brings a healing for women as well, as an example of healthy masculinity. There's a lot of women that say, well, hey, where are all these, healthy masculine men? And I say, well, check out my series, And you're also
you're collecting them.
Well, so and everyone is unique, and that's what I love as well. And I know we did have a little chat before we started, but I think it's worth repeating that with this, and I love the polarity stuff, I really do, but I do feel that everyone and every relationship has got their little niche on the scale. I don't think it's all about being in the top 10% to balance that. Some couples are 40-60, some are 70-30. It's all about finding, as you said, what each of you want. But what this series is showcasing is that every man is so different, and for women to
Yeah.
see that it's not just one stereotype of healthy masculinity. There's so many differences in every man that brings his story to the show. So thank you for being a part of that.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Gemma.
You're welcome. So I'll say goodbye to everyone. And I just need you to stay on one moment, please, Jason. We'll get a title for the show and no escaping. And I'll see everyone next time. Thank you. Goodbye. Stop recording.